the effect of pandemic on education and the future of the students. Friends, we are not against any reforms in education. We are for reforms in education. But any reform, if undertaken by the authorities with scant regard to the social competence or social strength of the students, then education would result in creating a contradiction within the society. The ultimate purpose of education is not individualistic. It should be a device or a method or an instrument to forge a progressive social order. Education should lead us to reduce social gaps. Anything which widens the social gap is to be rejected as antisocial. Now this pandemic, of course, it was described as unprecedented, unexpected. That is why recently the union government had given a statement in the Supreme Court stating that the Disaster Management Act cannot be applied to the pandemic conditions. This explanation they gave when the question of paying ex gratia to the victims of pandemic arose. They did not have money and the existing policy is inapplicable to pandemic situation. Now we are in the midst of the second wave of COVID pandemic. When the first wave commenced in India, the response from the union government was little lethargic, insensitive and irrational too. That was availed by the rumor mongers for communally demonizing certain sections of society. The states could not do much. The union government even then had an excuse that it was an unexpected pandemic. But now they cannot have that excuse. It is second wave. The Western nations suffered much during the first wave. At that time, they too were, it was unexpected for the Western nations too. But when the second wave commenced, the effect were more damaging, devastating in India than in other countries. Because during the first wave itself, those nations learned the lesson, made adequate responses so that they could tackle the second wave more effectively. They could devise a policy, they could mobilize funds, they could execute them. But in India, the situation is different. The states have to bear the brunt of this pandemic, but they could not devise their own policies because they were bound by the central union's directions. They do not have adequate funds. The states have nearly 15% of the total revenue of the nation. 85% of revenues are controlled by the union government. Even if any state was willing to respond to the pandemic in a suitable manner, they were suffering from the dearth of funds. They were expecting union government's intervention, union government's munificence. So when the second wave of the coronavirus attacked the Indian people, you cannot simply dismiss it as unexpected or unprecedented. It was expected because we were forewarned there was going to be a second wave. But we were underprepared to meet the challenge. So under this condition, be this reality in the background. We will have to analyze its impact on education and its impact on the student community. Education is in the concurrent list. How the pandemic affected education, elaborated all those things. How the students lost classes, lost the midday meals, and how, as an alternative, they introduced digitalization. The effect of pandemic is one thing, and the measures to counter the pandemic escalated the effects. It had worsened the condition. The cure was worse than the disease. That is how it happened. In view of the paucity of time, I will insist on 2 points. One is, during this pandemic period, we find indiscriminately digitalization of education at all levels. 2, excessive centralization in all educational activities. Digitalization, we are not opposed to digitalization. But indiscriminate digitalization creates wedges between social segments. The rural-urban divide, the poor-rich divide, and then the elite-non-elite divide. The social divides are being created and made very dangerous today. What we envisaged a better society in an independent India. Now these new divisions created by the adoption of the electronic devices for universal education, it distances poorer sections from formal education. Not all rural children can have access to these devices. That is one thing. But how the digital classes are used? Recently, UGC issued a circular stating that 40% of the learning mode should be in through digitalization, online teaching, 40%. In due course, this 40% would be increased to 50, 60, 70. So to begin with, 40% of the classes would be on online mode. These 40% online lessons would be decided by a remote control. The central union government, through its bureaucrats, would devise the lessons for the people of peoples of different states. That means they are bringing the education under the union's control. They are now trying to abuse these pandemic conditions to enforce a deceitful fascist agenda in education. They released a syllabus for history too. Availing this pandemic condition, they issued a uniform syllabus for UG program in history. The contents are decided by vested interest. Now the states, universities are asked to adopt this. It is nothing but cultural invasion. India's multiplicity, heterogeneity is being denied, and India is attempted to be made as one state, one culture, one religion, one government, one authority state. That is the fascist agenda. Conditions differ from place to place, from one linguistic group to another linguistic group, from one economic group to another economic group. The plurality of the nation must be accepted, and that should be reflected in decentralizing educational responsibilities. Though education is still now in the concurrent list, Everything is decided by a central authority. Even the syllabus, what to be read, what to be written, they are all decided by the central authority. And the universities, which have their own boards of studies, academic council, have no role to play in syllabus making or in classroom teaching. Is it not a fascist agenda? The pandemic tragedy is being availed by the ruling class to enforce their fascist agenda deceitfully. That online mode, digitalization, is meant for over centralization. At the same time, the state educational institutions are not having adequate resources to experiment with any measure that would overcome the present difficulties. Examinations are suspended, classrooms are suspended, rendering several hundreds of teachers jobless. And without jobs, the parents could not send offer their children the modern modes of learning. Nothing is done. Nobody is interested. No, by nobody I mean those who hold power. They are not interested in ensuring equitableness and inclusiveness in education. Instead, they try to make India a unitary state. What is the result? Recently, you see that the Chief Administrator of Lagdivs, Lakshadweep, Prof. Patel, issued directions that the midday meal should not have non-vegetarian items. The innocent people of this Lagdivs, their children were eating beef during the midday meal. The ruling party had a different attitude towards beef eating. They now make the people of Lagdivs to forego their beef. Even dietary practices are being altered during this pandemic period. My food should be decided by me, not by others. Because of the minority phobia, they think that they should avail this opportunity to enforce their will and wish on everything through every means, including educational means. And what would happen to this country? The system of education which were envisaged by our forefathers, by the eminent educationalists, were being disfigured. And the education is now made a corporate commodity and a communalistic agenda. And pandemic had become a very convenient occasion for these people to introduce their schemes, or thrust their schemes on the poorer people, on other states. Recently, the Tamil Nadu government declared that it would not accept the new education policy. There are many things which are to be debated in public. There must be discussion between states and the center. Though the Modi government adopted this new education policy, many states are still having reservations about these new education policy programs. Tamil Nadu Chief Minister, Tamil Nadu has declared that it would not accept a new education policy, national education policy. But pandemic conditions prevented a massive resistance to the unjust orders affecting education of the millions of people. Any disease, including pandemic, what you call the coronavirus or anything, the first thing required is that the body should have resistance. The power of resistance would save you, even if the worser forms of the viruses attack you. You should develop resistance in your body. If you lose resistance, you will succumb to the disease. That is applicable to the social educational sector also. When unjust things are imposed on us, the society must express its readiness to resist. On one pretext or other, if the resistance are not organized or not made explicit, we are likely to see the end of our multilingual, multicultural, multi-religious nationality. Friends, it is high time to see that the pandemic conditions are to be tackled. In Western countries, second waves could be tackled successfully because the Western nations have no problem in finding funds. They need not beg with the central government. The states have their own resources. They could evolve a policy. They could execute the policy because they have their own funds. In India, the states have to bear the brunt of it. The central government categorically stated that health is an state purview, state list. But revenues are in the central list. You cannot evolve a policy. Even if you evolve a policy, you cannot execute it because for the funds you will have to beg with the central government. Center is not releasing funds. It wants the states to go for borrowing money from the banks. The audacity which is shown by the central government shows that if we are not adequately alert during this pandemic period and offer resistance to unjust measures, we are likely to lose an integrated India. We want India an integrated one. We want India to be to render justice to all segments of the Indian societies. And this pandemic is abused by some forces to enforce their deceitful hidden agenda. The others, people like us who are interested in an equitable society, an inclusive order, where no one will be second to another. For such a condition, education should be the major instrument. Educationalists should have the freedom to evolve their own program. Examination, cancellation of examination, one thing. But examination alone is not evaluation. Examination is a part of evaluation. They cancel examination stating that they cannot take the student lives for a risk. We understand. But at the same time, how they are adamant in holding the centrally sponsored the NEET or JEE. For those examination, pandemic is not a hindrance. But for regular school and collegiate level examinations, pandemic is a very big impediment. So they are cancelling examination without providing a viable alternative. The viable alternative cannot be decided by the center. Every state has its own conditions. The states must be permitted to evolve their own alternatives to overcome this pandemic. The system is in danger. The students' future are in danger. Even during these pandemic conditions, the corporates are amassing wealth, and we are losing jobs. The gap between the rich and the poor is becoming widened. And poor people had become poorer, and poorer people having become poorest. And these social gaps reflect in the educational scenario too. Our first problem is that education must be available for all, and the graded education must be avoided at any cost. Since education has to be realized by the state government, which is nearer to the people, the central intervention must be minimal. You should have only a coordinating authority, not a dictating authority. The UGC has no competence to publish a syllabus for the UG program for all the universities. It is an administrative body. There are eminent historians elsewhere. Why they were not consulted in evolving policy? Because you want to say this Indus Valley civilization is a Vedic Valley culture, and the Muslim period are very demonic period. And you want to hide so many things of the south from the students. There is no history for the regions in the new syllabus. So the pandemic, it creates problems for us. More than the pandemic, the union government's responses to the pandemic have become more dangerous, more toxic. So we shall realize that we should sensitize all the people, stakeholders, and make them prepared to resist unjust moves from the center. Thank you.
Of West Indies.